Yeah, I know, they were both here. Where is Tim and Gianna? Yeah. Okay. So, the last thing we were talking about was, I got to finish up this Revolutionary, okay? Now, the last thing we were talking about was the Second Continental Congress. Okay, this Congress lasts from 1775 to 1781. Okay, that's a long Congress. Now, each of the 13 colonies sent delegates. Some delegations were 3, some had 5. Okay, but the minimum was 3. You're going to have at least 3 there. Okay, so for instance, from Virginia, they had 3. Guy that wrote the Declaration. The only guy that showed up in a military uniform every day. And Richard Henry Lee. Richard Henry Lee, L-E-E, who is the great-grandfather, I believe, of Robert E. Lee of Virginia. Okay, the Lee family. Each delegation was different. Okay, now what happened in 1781 to say this no longer needs to be in session? Yeah, they wrote the article. Now, remember, in a confederal system, most of the power stays at the state and local level. Yes, the national government is very weak. Okay, now the war, revolution, goes from 1775 to 1783. Okay. Now, the Declaration of Independence is adopted in 1776. Okay. And as I was talking about last week, John Adams really becomes the driving force for independence, especially after Bunker Hill, the Battle of Bunker Hill. Okay, as he said, Massachusetts blood has been spilled. Okay. Now, a couple of the major topics that they're discussing in this Congress is one, we need an army. We're at war with Britain. Now, this is even before the Declaration is signed. We need an army. The other big topic is a Declaration of Independence. Now, in order to agree to these things, in this Congress, you need 9 of 13 colonies to agree. That's tough to do. So at the beginning, they weren't really talking about independence, but after Bunker Hill, it came up and they started debating this. Now, guys, the biggest resistance you're going to see towards independence is coming out of New York and the Carolinas, South Carolina and North Carolina, Georgia. They're very much opposed to this idea, and many in New York are. Okay. Virginia is key because it's a southern colony. It's the most populated colony, and it's got some of the most influential people in it. If you can get Virginia, you might have a chance at getting what's south of them. Okay, so when we talk about this, forming an army, there was resistance to this because they're like, hey, we need to form an army. And they're like, no, like Pennsylvania's like, we're not ready for this war that Massachusetts is doing. So John Adams did something really smart. They named a commander of the army before they formed an army. So he proposed this in front of the delegates, and nobody really wanted to, shame or talk down about George Washington. You know what I mean? Like, so when John Adams says, I see just one man that should lead this army, good gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Washington. Washington stands up in the room. He's 6'4". The average American male in 1775, 76 was about 5'8". He's a giant. He's wearing this uniform. So Washington stands up because he's not going to stay in the room for a vote. Franklin says something flattering about Washington, and he walks out of the room, and they elect him commander-in-chief. Of what? They don't even have a name for this army, let alone who's going to serve in it and how they're going to arm them and give them uniforms and boots. What color are they going to wear? This is all being made up from scratch. So they come up with a commander, and they're going to call him commander-in-chief. Okay? Then they come up with the army. General Washington needs men. So what are we going to call this army? The Continental Army. Brand new. Now this passes by a 9-13 vote. Okay? As they get closer and closer, they've got to write this declaration, yes? So they got something working. So they set up a committee, what you do in government, people, right? Bureaucracy. You need a committee. We're going to call this the Declaration Committee. Now, when they form this committee, a lot of people are still not, they're not thinking this is going to happen. Now, who's going to be on this committee? Of course, the guy that writes it, right? Okay, and we'll put a star next to his name. The guy that's really pushing for it. Okay, and of course, you want some wisdom there. Okay, we need some influence up in New York. So we're going to put Roger Sherman on this. And Livingston is the other guy. Okay. These 5 men will sit on the committee. They'll say, okay, Jefferson, go write it. So he writes it. And then he shows it to these guys. Okay. And they're going to, they're going to critique it. Okay. You think Jefferson likes being critiqued? Who better than do it than John Adams? Okay. He's obnoxious and disliked. All right. And he's really rubbing people the wrong way. Okay. Because he's so forceful in this Congress. Okay. And the situation with Pennsylvania, Dickinson of Pennsylvania, you've got 3 delegates from Pennsylvania. Dickinson, Franklin, and what's the guy's name? Caesar Rodney is the 3rd one. Okay. Rodney's got cancer. Like, for him to go to Philadelphia, to show up for these meetings with cancer, 1775, it's tough on him, okay? Dickinson is a pacifist. He's a Quaker. He's a pacifist, okay? And so John Adams has offended him multiple times because Dickinson seems to be the one that wants to reconcile with Britain, so does New York. Okay. So they write this thing. They're going to amend the Declaration, and then they're going to share it with the rest of the body. This is where the real trouble starts to take place, because some of the stuff Jefferson wrote in is going to be very offensive to some of the colonies, especially your slave-holding colonies. Now, was Jefferson a slaveholder? Absolutely. Okay. Now, you guys have your books? If you would, turn to page 21. Now, those of you that still have not watched the video, it's okay. You probably want to watch it, okay? But there is a synopsis of the video here on page 21, bleeding over into 22, okay? Now, page 23, you get the myth of the Midnight Messenger, the Paul Revere story that comes from Longfellow. Did you guys do that in English, Longfellow? Okay. All right. So that really gives you the truth behind the whole "the British are coming" thing, if you read that. Okay. Then I want you to forward past 25 and 26 all the way to 32. The other delegates in the Congress are going to butcher this document. Okay? We will not vote for this if you leave this in the Declaration of Independence. We will not vote for independence. Okay? And some of the verbiage about slavery and the freedom of man and the equality of man really felt to South Carolina that this document would lead to the abolition of slavery. And it kind of does. It just takes it about 100 years, right? 90 years. Okay? But, so they're like, take it out. We're not joining. It's about this time that the president of the Second Continental Congress, does anybody know who that is? The president? Yeah, John Hancock. Which is interesting, right? I mean, this is a son of liberty right here. Is the president of the Second. Now, you would think he would be very biased towards the independent side, yes? And hatred of the British. Hancock says, listen, John, I know you're not going to like hearing this, but if we're going to declare independence, all 13 clocks must strike at the same time. Hancock proposes that any vote for independence requires unanimous decision. And John Adams is like, what the hell, John? How am I going to get all 13? Okay, but listen, if they only had 9, we would have started our new nation already at war with one. You know what I mean? This would have been horrible. And so Hancock is right. We need all 13. So guys, the issue of slavery is going to be pushed back on another generation to deal with. As Franklin put it, Franklin said this to Adams, because Adams and Franklin were both against slavery. And Franklin told Adams, said, look, the issue in front of us is not slavery. The issue in front of us is independence. You need to remember that. Okay? Because they wanted to get rid of it. Okay? But you're not getting 13 out of 13 if you try and slide that in to this document. Does that make sense? Now, it's easy to go back and criticize our founding fathers here and say, look, these guys could have ended slavery in 1776, but they didn't have the will to do it. Of course they didn't. We wouldn't have had independence had they tried to do that, because there's no way you're getting all 13 colonies on board. So if you want to bash the founders for owning slaves, understand that slavery was not created in America. Slavery has been around for centuries. It's still around today. Okay? So, I mean, recognize what it is. Some of these men were slaveholders. Some of them wanted to hold on to it dearly. It was their livelihood. Okay? And others wanted to get rid of it. But there's no independence with that in it. Okay? With that in the document. So, as this debate continues, you've got to get Virginia. You've got to get Virginia. So, Jefferson Washington was on his way to, where's Harvard? Cambridge, to meet his army. And Richard Henry Lee don't have instructions of how to vote for independence or against independence. So go back a couple pages to page 25. Remember how important Virginia is to this process. So without instruction, Virginia couldn't vote yea or nay on independence. So Patrick Henry gives a speech in front of the Second Virginia Convention, an impassioned speech about freedom and liberty, in which the famous words are shared: give me liberty or give me death. The Virginia Convention, after that speech, voted to send instructions to their delegation in Philadelphia to vote for independence. Now you got Virginia. Now you got a shot at South Carolina. And North Carolina is going to follow what South Carolina does. Okay. So this is a major impact, this speech, on the founding of this country. And it's something you should include in your essay. You don't have to write a lot about it. It bears mentioning. Okay? Now, turn the page. This also bears mentioning. 1776, as the Congress was meeting and talking about independence, Thomas Paine pens the pamphlet, Common Sense. Common Sense. It's not very long, guys. It's just a pamphlet. Okay? This will sell 120,000 copies in the colonies. It's a country of 2.5 million people. Now, when people read it, this is really good, man. You need to read it too. You know what I mean? So 120,000 copies saturates the country. This is the citizens that are reading this. And they are, talking to their delegates, their people in Philly, and saying, look, this makes a lot of sense that this small island across the Atlantic should come to dominate the new world as big as it is and how many people we have. It doesn't make sense. This argument by Thomas Paine is going to help change hearts and minds towards independence. And it should be mentioned in your essay. Now, Thomas Paine, I'd like to take a little bit more credit than he should. He no doubt had an impact, but he felt kind of single-handedly that he, in this pamphlet, were the reason we declared independence. Okay. This is a little, what's the word I'm looking for? Presumptuous, egotistical, all of those work well. Yes. In fact, T. Paine, after the American Revolution is a success, he goes to France for the French Revolution, right? They kick him out, and he comes back to the States, and really, his thing is, revolution. Kind of like Sam Adams. That's their thing. It's stirring up trouble. And when Washington becomes president eventually, Thomas Paine will have the audacity to criticize George Washington in public. Who does that? In fact, it will make him a lot of enemies. He will die a lonely man. Even the Quakers will not give him a funeral. Yes. He was just, he's kind of like Joseph McCarthy, right? McCarthyism. Dude, he was one of the most popular guys in America. Tail gunner on a B-17 bomber in World War II, comes back, he's elected to the Senate, he's trying to protect the country from these commies, these Reds, okay? And then he goes too far, next thing you know, he's an ism, and everybody hates him. And he dies a lonely man. Richard Nixon. Okay. Paine. Now, the next page. Now, this is not something you would include in your essay, but it bears mentioning by me. Okay. Now, guys, the war. Washington starts with 20. You don't have to write about the war on that. But he starts with 20,000 men. They meet him in Cambridge, Massachusetts. They get them uniforms. They're wearing blue. Got a red. They got some red accents in there. But, yeah. Now, smallpox, other diseases. They don't really have enough guns. They don't really have enough boots. It's a ragtag army. Enlistments like 6 months long. So he takes his troops to New York, to Brooklyn. Okay? Where's the Boston Army and Navy right now? Boston. The British Army and Navy are in Boston. So the British Navy is going to sail north up to New York. And with 30,000 troops. Washington has 20,000. He's at Brooklyn Heights. And he realizes he's made a mistake. And so they barely even fight the British there. The British get off their ships and oh, this doesn't look good. We need to get the hell out of here. So under the cover of darkness and fog, they escape to Manhattan Island. And before you know it, they're headed south to Pennsylvania to Valley Forge for the winter. Now, these are fair weather soldiers, both sides, especially the British. They don't like to fight when it's cold. And you certainly don't fight when it's raining, because we're actually talking about real gunpowder here. So when gunpowder gets wet, it doesn't spark. You know what I mean? So you don't fight when the weather's bad. They're fair weather soldiers, sunshine soldiers, if you will. Okay? Now, so Washington, now by the time he gets to Valley Forge, by December, his army has gone from 20,000 to 2,000. And they're freezing to death down there. Now, the British have hired these Hessians from Prussia to go down and make sure the Continental Army stays down there for the winter. And they're based in New Jersey and Trenton, New Jersey. And so, on December 19, 1776, Thomas Paine writes this, The Crisis. This is read to our troops at Valley Forge. Let me read it for you. These are the times that try men's souls. The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will, in this crisis, shrink from the service of their country. But he that stands it now deserves the love and thanks of man and woman. Tyranny, like hell, is not easily conquered. Yet we have this consolation with us, that the harder the conflict, the more glorious the triumph. What we obtain too cheap, we esteem too lightly. 'Tis dearness only gives everything its value, Heaven knows how to set a proper place on its goods, and it would be strange indeed if so celestial an article as freedom should not be highly rated. 6 days later, Washington will lead his troops across the Delaware River in a sleet storm and attack the Hessians at Trenton and defeat them. And a week later, they will attack Princeton, New Jersey, and get the second victory for the Continental Army of the war. Those victories will be few and far between. So when Washington engaged the British, his motto was never give up the army, which is what he did in New York. He's like, this is a bad situation. I'm getting my army out of there. Okay. They did that for 8 years. Right? Picking and choosing the battles, whether they should engage or not. Okay. So Thomas Paine did have an important role in our country. Maybe not as big as he thought, but certainly an important role. Okay. So July rolls around of 76, and they are going to vote on this declaration. Okay. And all 13 colonies had been convinced by them to sign. Okay. Now, while the war was going on, they didn't stay in Philly the whole time. They had sessions, so they could go home for a little while, then come back. There were times during the war where the Second Continental Congress had to flee Philadelphia because the British Army was too close. Because all these men had committed treason by attaching their names to this document. Many of them would lose their homes. They would lose their families, their sons fighting in the Revolution, their fortunes. These were powerful men. They were all rich. They were all landowners. They were risking all that. Okay? And as Franklin said, after they put their names on it, we must all hang together, or we must most assuredly will all hang separately. And then ask why he made his signature so big on the document. John Hancock said, so Fat King George can read it. Okay. So, there ends your essay, the Declaration of Independence. Now, let me put the essay question up here for you. And let's talk about it. Okay. Tomorrow is going to be a review day. Okay. So you guys will have the hour. This is what your review sheet looks like. It's on Canvas. I will make some copies today for those of you that don't print one out before that. Come on. Okay. Pull this up real quick. Did I turn on the lens? Okay, so as I was saying, guys, the objective portion is 20 matching questions. If you look at the review sheet, it comes up here. What is going on there? There we are. There we go. Okay, so these are all things that we talked about in the notes. Okay, and so just know the difference between authoritarian and totalitarian. Know the difference between socialism and communism. between direct democracy and representative democracy. Okay? Yeah.
I don't have a question.
What was that?
Nothing. I was just messing around.
Okay.
I don't have a question.
Freaking mouse. Okay. You got 2 listing questions. Yes? Concept of democracy, characteristics of the state, right? People, territory, sovereignty, government. Okay. All right. And then a 6-point long answer question. Comparing and contrasting the 2 social contract theories of Hobbes and Locke. Okay. This is a 30-minute test, I'd say. Okay. Yeah.
What's the format of like the first half? Like
Matching, 20 questions. 2 listing, 1 medium answer. The essay. Explain the impact the following had on the foundation of our government. The English founding documents, the English traditions, language, layers of government, terminology, 3 English documents, 3 constitutions, the Magna Carta, Petition of Right, and the English Bill of Rights. Now, as I stated earlier, I believe, I do not need you to get bogged down on this in listing each of the rights found in each of the constitutions. You don't need to do that. Do some of the rights bear mentioning, especially ones that would be violated by the British later on? Possibly. Those might be good ones. Okay? But again, limited government, representative government. Guys, this is a timeline of sense. We're starting in 1215. And what document are we ending? Declaration in 1776. Okay, so do dates matter? You're talking about a time period of history. Yeah, dates matter. So you know where you are. Okay? So, you guys can write this how you want. Now, as far as a thesis statement goes, like with an introduction, I am not Mrs. Katz. I am grading for content, not style, not grammar, okay, not spelling. Again, I don't ask students to do something I can't. Right? But I'm looking for the story. Okay? What happened? Who was involved? What were the events that shook America, that took us down this road? Now, some of you claim you're good writers. Okay? Listen. What are we writing about? This is inspirational of the founding of the nation that you live in. That some feel is the greatest country that has ever graced this earth. So if you want to write it like that, you can. I got to read 45 of these things. Okay, so if you want to, throw some flowers in there, spruce it up a little bit, that's okay. And listen, if you're missing a little bit of content and you write a really well-structured essay with nice themes and stuff, right? Then that's going to help you. Now, can you give me all the facts and get a 40 out of 40? Yes. Give me everything I'm looking for and get a 40 out of 40. Okay? That's hard to do. Don't give many. 40s out of 40. Okay? Because when I go through this, I'm going to underline stuff I was looking for. Yeah, I wanted that. Good. I wanted that. I wanted that. And in the column, as I grade these and get carpal tunnel, trying to prep you guys well so I don't get carpal tunnel, because this won't give me carpal tunnel. Writing all the crap you left out will give me carpal tunnel. That's called feedback. Okay, and I'll give you feedback. Okay. So, if you want to write this as 1 paragraph, 2 paragraph, 3 body paragraphs, you can do that. Now, if you're talking about the colonial era, obviously you got 3 types of colonies. you've got 150 years of salutary neglect, where the colonies basically made up their own governments. Some had more royal influence than others, but the independent colonies like Massachusetts and New Hampshire and others, they basically self-governing. And in all of the colonies, they elected the legislature from white male property owners that controlled what? They controlled the purse. They controlled the money. That's huge. Okay? So you talk about the colonial era, and you don't really have any founding fathers to talk about here yet. But when you get to the revolutionary experiences, you got founding fathers to talk about. Revolutionaries? Yeah, the Sons of Liberty. Committees of Correspondence. Okay? So you may have founding fathers in this one. You may want to split it up. Do paragraph, the British founding documents, a colonial paragraph, and then lump these two together, revolutionary and founding fathers, including speeches and famous documents. Like, right? So however you want to structure this is up to you, okay? And if you have time, we'll write a conclusion. If you're like finishing up, the bell's about to ring, like Mr. Eva, I haven't written my conclusion, it's okay. They don't like us to have you miss the next hour. I don't know what you have fifth hour, but I usually end up sending out an email to the faculty saying, hey, I've got a bunch of students still writing an essay in honors government. I write that email every year. So, is what it is. Okay? So that's Wednesday during class. And you guys have lunch class, so hopefully you'll have time to do that. Okay? So tomorrow, if you don't have a copy of this, I'll give you a copy of this, and you guys can, you'll have the hour to study tomorrow. Okay? Cadence! Cadence!
Yes.
City League champ. Saw it on social media. Awesome. Liked it. We got any we got male wrestlers in here?
Nope.
Swimmers?
Nope.
Don't want to leave anybody out.